Whispers in the Dark by Terry Sutton. Iola carefully unwrapped a lemon drop and placed it on her tongue, savoring the sharp burst of citrus that danced across her taste buds. She had inherited her love for lemons from her sister Jacqueline, who had introduced her to the tangy fruit when they were children. The sugar-coated candy melted slowly, its sweetness a small comfort in the quiet of the evening. The wind whispered through the branches of the large maple tree outside, its limbs scratching against the tall, arched windows of the manor like skeletal fingers. Iola loved that tree, feeling as if it were a quiet companion in the solitude of her home. Inside, the flickering light of a single candle fought against the oppressive darkness, casting long, wavering shadows. Helen had just left after their evening tea, her warm smile still lingering in Iola's mind as she watched her friend walk down the path toward her own house, just a few doors down. They had shared a lovely conversation, discussing Helen's garden and the vibrant flowers that were blooming, despite the coming chill of autumn. Iola glanced over at the bookshelf, admiring her collection of novels. Over the years, she had gathered these books from friends, family, and tiny, hidden bookstores she stumbled upon during her travels. Some held special memories, connections to people and places she cherished. She picked up The Hounds of Baskerville by Arthur Conan Doyle, holding it for a moment and appreciating the familiar weight of it in her hands before setting it on the kitchen counter to read later. Just then, she heard the familiar sound of the neighbor kitties meowing outside. Concerned that they hadn't been fed properly, she made her way to the kitchen. As she moved through the room, her eyes fell on a vase of hydrangeas, a gift from her friend Helen earlier that day. The flowers were stunning, their petals fading from a deep burgundy to a dusty rose, capturing the essence of autumn in their subtle, muted tones. Iola paused for a moment to admire them before reaching for the teapot. She filled it with water, letting the leaves steep inside, allowing the rich aroma to fill the kitchen. Setting aside the novel she had selected, Iola filled a teapot with hot water and added the tea leaves, letting them steep as she moved to prepare small plates of food for the neighborhood cats who often visited her porch. Once her tea was ready, Iola stepped out onto the porch, noticing the slight chill in the evening air as she arranged the dishes of food on the porch steps. Marigold, a pretty calico, swirled around her feet, purring in thanks. After gathering a few dead leaves that had collected unsightly around the steps, she stood up and looked across the yard. Immediately, she saw him, her neighbor, standing there directly facing her, watching as she fed the cats. The soft light from her porch illuminated his face, and she realized with a jolt that he was peering over the top of the 6-foot fence that separated their yards. He must have been standing on something to look over at her like that. She hadn't expected to see him, she fully expected he would carry on as if nothing had happened, and she would simply think of him as the creepy neighbor from now on. The moment he realized he'd been seen, he quickly ducked down behind the fence to hide. A shock ran through Iola. She had thought she was out there alone, chatting softly to the kitties. The sight of him startled her so much that she reacted without thinking. She ran inside the house and slammed the door behind her. Her heart pounded as she stood there, back pressed against the door, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that had gripped her. After a moment, Iola moved to the kitchen to retrieve her tea. As she took the first sip, she glanced out the window. She knew the yard would be empty and that the neighbor she now considered a creep would pretend he never watched her in the dark. She explained to herself in her mind that he likely just wanted to see the ritual of the feeding of the strays. The night was peaceful once more. Her eyes drifted to the book she'd left on the counter, but it wasn't there. Frowning, Iola wandered around the kitchen, searching for the book she had just set down. As she walked through the house, checking various surfaces, her curiosity grew. She hadn't moved the book, she was sure of it. Her search took her to her bedroom where the book she had left on the kitchen counter was now inexplicably lying open on her bed, its pages fluttering gently as if touched by an invisible hand. The breeze dancing the curtains in front of the window. She looked around for an explanation. Everything else was in its place. Her chest now ached with fear. She backed away from the room and tightly closed the door. Returning to the study, Iola decided to settle down and read. She chose the velvet chair in the corner so nothing could possibly be behind her. She took a moment trying to calm herself. Violent pounding so loud you could almost see it began on the front door. Iola's body froze, her entire body unable to move. The pounding continued, growing louder and more insistent, but she remained frozen in fear, unable to react. She felt trapped in her frozen body. When the pounding finally stopped, she heard the sound of heavy boot heels leaving, the stomping echoing through the stillness of the night. When her body released the hold it had on her, Iola slowly got up and made her way to the bathroom. She needed to see what her face looked like as she felt the blood had drained from her face. Standing in front of the mirror, she expected to see her face ghost white, but instead, she noticed that her lips were blue. She hadn't been breathing when she could not move. The fear had been so intense, she had simply been paralyzed by her instincts. As she stared at her reflection, curiosity lingered. The night had left her with a deep sense of discomfort. She had a strong sense that something unseen had just protected her from what might have been a terrible nightmare. She left the bathroom, moving quietly back to the room, still trying to move quietly, and sank down into a chair, trying to piece together what had just happened. Outside, the wind howled once more, and the wind-swept branches continued scraping against the windows. She knew she would have trouble getting to sleep after what had happened. The next morning, Iola awoke to the usual sounds of the neighborhood, but everything felt different. As she stepped outside to collect the cat's dishes, she noticed neighbors walking by, their faces tight with worry, their conversations hushed. She overheard passing neighbors chattering about their concern over Helen. Her front door had been found open, and she didn't answer when a neighbor called for her. Inside, the front room looked disturbed, with chairs knocked aside and things scattered about. The realization hit Iola: it could have been her. What if she hadn't listened to that deep, primal instinct that told her to stay still, to stay hidden? Helen's disappearance wasn't some abstract horror, it was a vivid, terrifying reminder that the danger had been real. And it had been so close. Her legs trembled beneath her as she backed away from the window, the weight of the morning's revelations pressing down on her. The fear from the night before surged back, stronger now, accompanied by a sickening realization of how narrowly she had escaped. As she gathered her thoughts and prepared to step outside, Iola noticed something on her front porch. Lying near the front door, almost hidden in the shadow of the entryway, was a black leather glove. It was out of place, a stark contrast to the familiarity of her home. She bent down to pick it up, her fingers trembling as she realized this wasn't something she, or anyone she knew, had left there. Her heart raced as she stared at the glove, a new wave of fear washing over her. The glove was a chilling reminder that whoever had pounded on her door had been close, too close. And now, with Helen gone, Iola couldn't shake the feeling that the danger wasn't over, that it was still lurking, waiting for another chance.